Listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good evening, cheers very much for your company and welcome along to Neil Oliver Live, which has been this week hosted by me, Darren Grimes, as our lovable Scotsman Neil continues to enjoy a well-earned summer break. But don't worry, we've got a cracking lineup for you tonight and the big man is back next week. After a week in which London Mayor Sadiq Khan has expanded ULEZ, we'll speak to some of those directly affected by the Mayor's direct attack on motorists. And following the story of David Hunter, a 76-year-old man who admitted killing his wife after she begged him to do so, we ask, is euthanasia ever the right thing to do? Plus, we take a look at one of the most haunted places in my old stomping ground of Newcastle. All of that and more coming up right after the latest news headlines with Rory Smith.
Thank you very much, Darren. The Met Office is warning of possible danger to life as Storm Anthony batters parts of the UK. An amber warning is in place for southwestern parts of England and Wales. That runs until 7 o'clock this evening. Strong winds could cause flying debris, power cuts and even travel disruption. Meanwhile, a yellow weather warning for rain is in place for Northern Ireland, with flooding possible. Weather journalist Nathan Rao explains the conditions.
The wind speeds of this storm, Storm Anthony, are expected to be around 75-mile-per-hour gusts on the coasts and 55-mile-per-hour inland. It's not the strongest storm that we've seen, but because of the time of year, the trees are all in full leaf and it's holiday season, the schools are off, and where it's going to be hitting, the impact of this storm hitting today is likely to be greater than had the same sort of thing happened later in the year.
2 French police officers have been injured in clashes with migrants near Calais. Around 60 people threw rocks and other missiles as officers tried to stop people smugglers launching a small boat. The officers were treated in hospital for non-life-threatening injuries. GB News can reveal that 15,100 migrants have crossed the English Channel in small boats since the start of the year. That's down more than 2,500 on the same period last year. Prosecutors in the US have asked a judge to limit what Donald Trump can say publicly about a criminal case against him. They warn that Mr. Trump may be seeking to use evidence to target witnesses after he posted a message to social media that said, "If you go after me, I'm coming after you." While speaking at a Republican event in Alabama, the former US president described the allegations as fake and said he was being targeted for political reasons.
Every time they file an indictment, we go way up in the polls. We need one more indictment to close out this election. One more indictment, and this election is closed out. Nobody has even a chance.
Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan's party is calling for peaceful protests after a court sentenced him to 3 years in prison for illegally selling state gifts. Khan was convicted of misusing his 2018 to 2022 premiership to buy and sell items in state possession worth more than 140 million Pakistani rupees. The city of Lahore is preparing for unrest following the verdict. His lawyers are filing a petition against the decision in High Court. Mr. Khan has always denied any wrongdoing. England's Children's Commissioner says a shortage of foster carers will get worse without more investment. Dame Rachel D'Souza says nearly 3/4 of people who complete a fostering form do not go on to look after children. She warns bureaucracy may be a problem and is urging the government to make it easier to become a foster carer. Well, last year, a review called for £2.6 billion of new spending on children's social care over 4 years. The government says funding is not falling short. A Ukrainian intelligence source has claimed responsibility after a Russian tanker was damaged in a sea drone attack. Russian media reports that the SIG vessel was targeted as it approached the Kerch Strait. That's quite near the strategic bridge that links Russia with occupied Crimea. The attack comes after Ukrainian ports were pummeled by Russian drone strikes, for which Kyiv had threatened to retaliate. Amazon is experiencing a second day of strikes as workers walk out at its fulfilment centre in Staffordshire over pay. Meanwhile, another 2-day walkout is taking place at the company's warehouse in Coventry. The GMB union says this represents the biggest day of industrial disruption in the tech firm's history. The union says more than 1,000 people are taking part. Further, Sarah Udman is GMB's regional organiser. She told us what they want.
They've all had enough. They can't carry on living and sustaining on the wages that they are at the moment. They want better pay. It's as simple as that. They're not asking for the millions. They're asking for a sustainable living wage.
Thousands of trees are to be planted to mark the King's coronation earlier this year. The £2.5 million initiative, funded by the government, celebrates King Charles's passion for nature. The government says it will help to meet its targets to treble tree planting rates by the next election, but campaign group Friends of the Earth says it's only a fraction of what ministers need to do to meet those targets. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now though, it's back to Darren.
I want to start off by talking to you about our friends on the so-called liberal left. They can't help but be overly enthusiastic, can they? Their dedication is such that they often miss the mark, startling our usually easygoing British public. We all stand united in agreement, for example, that racism is unacceptable, full stop. However, let's also agree that importing America's deeply entrenched issues to our shores in the guise of the Black Lives Matter movement is not only unnecessary, but also divides us. Because we're different and don't wish to import divides from America that have never existed here. Similarly, we all cherish our green and pleasant land here in Britain. We want our rivers to run clean, our air to be pure, and our trees standing tall, don't we? But does that mean we need to turn our lives upside down for an environmental cause steered by a zealous Greta-inspired cult? Do we need to sacrifice our cars, our humble yearly holiday, or the joy of a steak dinner in our country contributing a mere 1% of global CO2? Something just doesn't add up for me here. And let's talk about personal freedom. You want to dress in feathers and call yourself Lord Gobbledygook? You go right ahead. It's your right in a country like ours. Sleep with any consenting adult that'll have you. Live your life in peace and security, but don't encroach on the rights of others. There's a line, and it's crossed when we jeopardise women's safe spaces, meddle with sports, and risk our children's understanding of their own identity, all under the banner of a new age gender ideology. Costa Coffee, I'm very much looking at you when you question your moral choices. And on a more sombre note, who among us doesn't want our loved ones to depart this world with dignity and peace? But look across the Atlantic, And our Canadian cousins have shown us the dangers of a hasty implementation of assisted dying. The pandemic prince and king of whackery and wokery, Justin Trudeau, well, he's inadvertently sounded an alarm bell to the Western world. Canada's Liberal government introduced the Assistance in Dying, or MAID, in 2016. Now, this MAID, or MAID, isn't your friendly housemaid, but more akin to a grim reaper for those suffering from severe mental health issues. You see, I say that actually this makes clear we must tread carefully, as our MPs gather evidence from around the world to assess the impact of assisted suicide. We should remember our recent mantra, protect the NHS. Do you remember that one? But how far might that idea be stretched? How many might be coerced or simply convinced to end their lives prematurely in order to ease the strain on the NHS, to avoid becoming a burden to their families, or to escape the torment of mental health issues? Canadian voices like Lisa Powley's, a woman in her 40s, by the way, who's battled anorexia since she was 8 years old, well, she's been demanding the right to assisted suicide in Canada. And I fear that there are parallels here to the trans debate, where children's desires for irreversible medical procedures are hastily affirmed. Could we see a similar rush to validate requests for suicide due to mental health diagnoses here at home? A Canadian Army veteran who competed in the Paralympics in 2016 told a government committee that she was offered euthanasia when she asked for a stairlift to be installed in her home. Now, our veterans already receive worse access to housing than illegal migrants arriving here. How many may be offered a needle over a waiting list for necessities? We have to ask ourselves what might be the implications for the vulnerable among us. You know, my mother, during the pandemic, held my Auntie Sharon's hand as she passed away from sepsis during the first lockdown. Now, her death was a painful reminder of the shortfalls in our social care system. But had assisted suicide been an option, could Sharon, who had spina bifida and was wheelchair-bound, have been pressured into choosing an early exit to alleviate perceived burdens upon the state? Imagine this and think seriously. You need social care, you need housing, you're stuck on a waiting list, and suddenly assisted suicide becomes an option. You're struggling financially due to a cost of living crisis. Well, mate, have you considered assisted suicide? You're trapped in the claws of addiction. Life is spiralling out of control. Assisted suicide becomes a disturbingly easy solution. In 2021, over 10,000 people ended their lives by assisted suicide and euthanasia in Canada, an increase of over 32% from the previous year. That's accounting for 3.3% of all deaths in Canada. This is real, and this is here in the West. I don't know about you, but I don't trust the system to get this right. Not by a long shot, I'll tell you that for free. I fear that we're veering too close to a dystopian reality where a Dr. Shipman-esque death by doctor on demand becomes normalised. Let's remember that a life, any life, is worth far more than 2 signatures and a depressed syringe that assisted dying requires under the Canadian law. Our most vulnerable might seem like financial burdens to penny-pinching bureaucrats, but they are much more than that to me, and I imagine you. They are cherished human beings who deserve our protection and support. And this is all despite the Canadian Supreme Court ruling that fears of a slippery slope into homicide were unfounded. Now, I can't help but look at Justin Trudeau's so-called liberal agenda and worry. Is it the future that we want for our country? I think it's time to hit the brakes on this conversation. Britain, we must consider where this path will ultimately lead. And if you ask me, there's precious little that we ought to be following Justin Trudeau in doing. Joining me tonight in the studio is the legendary futurist and lawyer Andrew Eborn. Andrew, you listened to me wittering on there. What do you think? Do you agree? Are you sceptical of the arguments that are made about assisted dying? Or do you think actually it's compassionate and all of those other arguments that come with being in favour of it?
What I love about this show is we always shine more light and less heat on the subject. And when people discuss these, they always go to the extremes. They always say, this is the worst case scenario where you've got to protect the vulnerable as opposed to freedom of choice. The law at the moment is very simple. In Section 2 of the Suicide Act, 1961, it's a criminal offence to assist or encourage somebody to kill themselves. And it's punishable by up to 14 years in prison. You have to balance that with Article 8 about freedom, about privacy and rights and respect and so on and so forth. What we also need to look at is people will mainly understand it when you're in that situation. If you've got somebody who is really genuinely ill and the best thing you can do is to release themselves, the question is, you've got a right to life, do you have a right to death? And I think it's looking at those sort of safeguards, if you like, to make that make sense. So the arguments, both sides, absolutely quote both extremes, but there is that middle ground. And I think in order to have a sensible debate, you have to have those who are directly affected. People often quote the example of an animal. If an animal is in distress, you would want to put it down. Now, that sounds very dramatic and quite inhumane and so on and so forth, but if you're looking at human life, you need to make sure that people make that element of choice. You've also got the line, if you like, about when you stop assistance, because what's counting as suicide if you withdraw medical treatment? So you work on that sort of principle. Where does that line get drawn accordingly?
Absolutely. But I mean, if we look at the Canadian examples that I gave there, you know, you've got a veteran who was offered, a Paralympian who was offered actually to end her life instead of wait for a stair lift. I mean, Paulie here, there as well, I believe she was 47 years old, Andrew, 47 years old, and she has anorexia. She's suffered from anorexia nervosa all her life. Now, that is, I don't doubt, a completely debilitating condition to actually have and suffer from for that long a time. But we can't be saying to people that the only way out of a condition like anorexia is to end your life.
Both of those examples are disgusting.
But do you worry it could happen here? You know, the NHS isn't exactly in a good state, is it?
No, and you made some great points in your brilliant opening. You sort of turned... thank you. Well, you called me legendary, so I've got to say something nice about you as well. But the principle is this, is people would be worried about finances, they'd be worried about being a burden on their family. If somebody was said, don't put a stair lift in, we can get rid of you straight away now, that's your choice. If those were true examples, then that would be appalling, and you need to look at that situation. What you're talking about is safeguards. So if you recognise somebody has a right to life and they have a right to choose what happens to themselves at the end of their life, and they want to speed up that process, then you have to make sure there are appropriate safeguards in place, so you don't take those extreme examples. I think that's where you need to look at it. And to be fair, the Canadians, they set out the different examples, and you've got to work, and it's still an ongoing feast. And we've had a number of attempts in the UK to do it, to balance the requirements of Article 8 with what we've got with the Suicide Act, and you need to make sure that those who are potentially affected can have that discussion. What would you want to do?
Well, I tell you what, you know, I am deeply sceptical because of what happened during those years of the lockdowns and all the rest of it, because the mantra of protect the NHS became, and the NHS is the UK's only religion these days, as much as it saddens me. But honestly, I just cannot see any way in which actually this isn't abused, and that's what I feel deeply concerned about. But we'll come back to this later on in the show. Thank you, Andrew Eborn there. Now, folks, coming up, I'm going to be joined by the editor of Spiked magazine, Tom Slater, to talk about why the green elites hate cars. Don't go away.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m. Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live with me, Darren Grimes. Cheers very much for your company. Now, joining me first of all this evening is the editor of Spiked magazine, Tom Slater, who recently wrote an article titled Why They Hate Cars. Now, Tom says the green elites have no idea how most people live. I mean, Tom, let's start off by asking that simple question. I mean, how many of us are actually using our cars over public transport? It's a shocking number, isn't it?
It is, and this is one thing that never figures in the debate, Darren, is it? So according to official government statistics, in the last year that we have numbers for, 2021, it was 88% of all passenger kilometres travelled in the UK were in a car. That could be a personal car, that could be a taxi. And yet you would think that vast numbers of people were cycling, were taking public transport. I think so much of this is a reflection, as in so many other issues, that the people who make decisions, the people who write about policy in this country are quite unusual, and they all live in one area, namely London, which does have pretty good public transport, though it could be better, and is an outlier, even amongst many English cities, in terms of people relying more to a greater extent on public transport than cars. And I think that's one thing that which just colours the entire debate, is that this agitation with cars, this disregard of people's concerns about ulez or low traffic neighbourhoods or anything else, is because it doesn't affect the people who are introducing these policies, and it doesn't affect the people who are cheerleading for them. And I think if they just got out of their bubble, they would start to realise why people are so upset by these things.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of that bubble then, Sadiq Khan says he's not prepared to step back, delay or water down ULEZ, which he says is going to save lives and protect children's lungs. You know, very, very strong rhetoric there. But when we look at air pollution, though, over the last 50 years, the trajectory has actually been going down, without drivers being coerced in. We've got a graph there for our radio listeners. Down without drivers actually being coerced into paying, what is it, $12.50 every time they go for a spin. I mean, Tom, what do you think ultimately actually explains the motives behind this? Do you actually believe that it's purely down to air pollution?
I don't think it's purely down to air pollution for the reason that you suggest. This is not a burgeoning public health issue in the way that Sadiq Khan likes to pretend it is. I think that probably the more generous argument is that Sadiq Khan is very wrapped up in any kind of moral crusade going. He likes the green issue. He likes anything that he can really virtue signal on, and that's one part of it. The other part of it, which I don't mean to sound too cynical when I say this, is that it's a pretty good money raiser if you're charging people £12.50 a day. And of course, we're not just talking about people who live in London as well. And this is one of the big problems with expanding ULEZ to the outer suburban London boroughs, is there's a lot of people who drive in and out of Greater London every single day without even necessarily thinking about it. So that's a very wide pool of people, including people who won't have any access to these scrappage schemes and so on. So I think it's a combination of both, Darren. There is a lot of political capital, particularly for left of centre politicians, to just jump in with both feet on the green agenda for whatever reason they see it as a road to virtue, even if it ends up punishing working class people as a consequence. But the flip side of it is the fact that it's a pretty good earner for the London mayoralty at a time when they do need that money.
On that point then, results that we saw quite recently actually with the Uxbridge and South Ruislip by-election, do you think actually this is going to be repeated, Tom, where actually politicians pushing policies that'll ultimately make voters potentially colder and poorer is going to see them punished at the ballot box, whereas actually I think the narrative thus far has been that, you know, go green and hug a husky is very much a vote-winning narrative?
I find that so ridiculous. You know, I mean, if you ask people in the abstract, are they in favour of cycling or walking, or are they in favour of net zero? They say, yeah, that sounds like a nice idea. But as soon as you ask them, would you want to give up your car? Or as soon as you ask them, are you willing to pare back your lifestyle or pay more for this? They all understandably say no. People don't expect politicians to make their lives harder or more expensive. It's quite the opposite. And I think we are going to start to see electoral effects of this, or even if it's not electoral, it will express itself in other ways. I mean, we saw this not just in France with the Gilets jaunes or what we're seeing in the Netherlands with the farmers, but in this country in 2000 with the fuel protests, we had hauliers and farmers blockade refineries and depots, bring the country to an absolute standstill because of the fact that the new Labour government wouldn't cut fuel duty at a time when prices were very high. And ever since, governments have been petrified of raising fuel duty as a consequence. So, you know, these politicians who are convinced that these policies are really popular, who are convinced that people will put up with, as you say, being poorer or colder, they're going to get a rude awakening one way or the other. And if it's not at the ballot box, I think it could easily be in some other more direct form of action.
Yeah, Tom, just finally then, it's not just London, is it? We talk a lot about London in this debate, but actually these clean air zones are popping up in places like Newcastle, for example, too. Mm-hmm. I've got a slight bias there and a sort of interest to declare, but we can't exclusively blame Labour just for this particular ULEZ scheme, when actually these schemes are popping up all around the country with different political authorities too.
I think that's exactly right. This isn't just a London-based discussion, not least because so much that's rolled out here suddenly gets rolled out across the country as well. And as you say, also both parties have a role to play in this. It was only last week that central government, i.e. the Tory government, said that we're no longer going to fund low-traffic neighbourhoods and schemes like that, which involve road closures and pushing people off the roads and so on. So the problem is this is one of those issues where the entire political class think it's a great idea. They haven't thought it through because they're so cut off from ordinary people. They don't get the idea that this is not going to be popular and it's not going to work. But as we're saying, with the Uxbridge by-election, with these policies really finally starting to bite now, they're going to be woken up from that illusion pretty soon, I think.
Well, Tom Slater, I hope with all of my heart that you are absolutely right. And I've no doubt you'll be chronicling it within the pages of Spiked Online. So thank you very much, Tom Slater, there for joining me. Now, folks, joining me to discuss how they've been personally impacted by Mayor Khan's ULEZ expansion is Rajinder Singh and Pritpal Kaur. Now, thank you very much for your time. How has it personally impacted your family?
My family, first thing, hello to you. My family is affected because I depend on pensioners, pension fund only. I visit school, helping them exercise. I do volunteer work 4 to 5 days for nothing. Only I depend on pensions. And our car is so old. And how can I reach with the things I carry on my cycle or walking on London transport, which is not.
It is actually a narrative, isn't it, that actually Londoners aren't really out and using their cars, that actually all Londoners, you know, are hopping in and out of public transport, whether that be the Underground or DLR or buses, for example, because there are much better transport links in London than there are in other parts of the country. But actually, a hell of a lot of Londoners are still using cars, such as yourself.
Well, because we use this car for the like going to schools, teaching children how to do the hula hoop and the skipping. So we can't really carry our equipment on the buses or on the trains. And our car is really old, which is about 23 years old, and that's going to go into scrapping scheme now. and they're giving us £2,000. That's not going to help me to buy a new car, you see? So there's nothing wrong with my car. So why should I have to pay a lot more money to buy a new car and scrap my old car?
Do you think there's an argument here for saying, naff off Sadiq Khan, because actually you would quite like to keep your car and you don't want to be told by the Mayor of London that actually you've got to get rid of your car in order to avoid being whacked with a 12 quid 50 tax, essentially?
Yes, I agree with you. Yes, we should be able to keep our car. It's still running in a very good running order. It's a very it's very reliable.
Yeah.
Now we have to get rid of it because the Mayor of London saying we have looks at being an old car. But how are we going to afford to buy a new one, which we do need a car? Without a car, we can manage going to schools.
Yeah, I mean, just to play devil's advocate, you know, Sadiq Khan, where he sat here right now, which I'm not sure he would in a hurry, but where he sat here right now, I imagine he'd say, look, this is about saving the lungs of London's children.
Like clean air.
I mean, do you buy that argument? Are you sort of persuaded by that argument at all?
Thinking about clean air, which I understand that, but you're not thinking about the people like us that we can't afford to buy another car. Car prices are so high at the moment, it's just impossible to buy a car. And that's taking away our independence, which we enjoy doing. How are we going to carry on doing what we're doing at the moment without the car?
Yeah.
We can't buy a car for £2,000.
Yeah, it's a lot of money that people are being asked to part with. It really, really is. And I think actually you guys giving us a real-life example of just how much people are being hit in the pocket and actually how many Londoners are really, really worried about this. So Rajinder Singh and Pripal Kaur, I thank you very much for your time today. Now, Andrew Eborn, I want to know what you think about this.
I think it's very simple. And what's great about this channel is you get real people on and say, how does it impact...
Real Britain.
Well, it is Real Britain. There's a show title there somewhere. What I found extraordinary, 645 billion kilometres, which is what we travelled, according to government statistics. 88% done by cars, vans and taxis, is what the statistics actually say. This is a tax on the poor. When you turn around and look at that sort of stuff, who are already suffering with inflation, with mortgage going through the roof and so on and so forth, unable to insulate that roof because of costs involved with that as well. So what we need to do, Uxbridge has already shown that the Labour Party, they snatched defeat from the jaws of victory as a result of it.
Very true.
And what's going to happen, it's going to give the Conservatives, this is why Rishi's out there saying, hurrah, in a way, let's embrace, just start oil, he's going to say. You work on that sort of principle because it's going to turn around and real people are going to say, we can't do this. And it's not just the motorists, it's the impact as well on the shops, on the restaurants and so on and so forth. And we see more and more people in the high street disappearing. You've got Wilko, the tragic news about them and so on and so forth.
I'm quite gutted about that.
Absolutely, we love Wilko, of course.
I love Wilko.
Big up north.
But I mean, how much do you think actually Rishi Sunak, is he doing enough to actually fight back against...
Well, it's an interesting narrative, and this is why I think it's not just about the clean air, whatever the science is on, and there'll be debates about that sort of side. It is a tax on the poor.
Yes.
And you work on that sort of basis, rather like parking fines.
Yes.
Certain people need the money so they can pay for other services. So what you need to do is listen to the real people. You turn around and talk about the real impact. It's all right talking about let's extend the scrappage value to £2,000 they've just done. Does that ameliorate it? Well, not really, because they still need their car.
Yeah.
88% of travel is by car. So if you don't have a car, what are you going to do?
Exactly.
And you work on that sort of premise. So I think the reality is that let's talk to the real people. It needs to be revisited. I don't know anybody that I've heard speak about it publicly who genuinely believes ULEZ is a good idea for the reasons cited.
And then the narrative, you know, again, with the net zero debate, and then we come to the ULEZ arguments that Sadiq Khan makes, actually, the data doesn't back up what he's saying, which is that London is getting far, far worse. That actually we're all breathing in toxic air. It's a wonder I made it into the studio from up there in the northeast, because actually London's air is so toxic, according to Mr.
And it's extraordinary because we've all become experts, haven't we? We've all become scientists, we've all become virologists, we're all experts on the Constitution. The reality is we don't know. So all we do is we peddle sound bites, and it's Edward Bernays, the father of PR, who says the best way to sell anything is through fear.
Well, Sadiq Khan's doing a very good job at that. Andrew will be back shortly. More still to come, folks, after the break. But first up, here's the weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So it's been quite a wet, windy and unsettled day across the UK, and that's been due to Storm Anthony. That's going to move away to the southeast though as we go through this evening to allow for some lighter winds to move in from the west. But we could still see a bit more in the way of cloud, rain and some thunderstorms clinging into the southeast for a while. Also some blustery conditions here. Elsewhere, things drying up, though we could still see some showers for western coasts, and there will be some clear spells around, so in rural areas, temperatures might just drop into the single figures. This will mean it'll be a generally brighter, drier and calmer start to the second half of the weekend, though still some blustery conditions, cloud and rain across East Anglia at first. Cloud and showers soon bubbling up elsewhere, and they could be heavy across Scotland, Northern England, and a chance of a thunderstorm for Northern Ireland, but generally feeling much more pleasant with those temperatures just creeping into the low 20s in the south. After another chilly night, though, on Sunday, it will be a bright start to the new week with plenty of sunshine around. Some showers soon starting to bubble up, but these will be less frequent and lighter in nature than what we're expecting for Sunday. But as we look towards midweek, it does look like things will settle down and become a bit drier, with those temperatures on the rise too.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hey, where's that global boiling stuff they keep telling we're about? But anyway, folks, after the break, we're going to be turning to something a little bit different. This week, we heard the story of the retired British miner, 76-year-old David Hunter, who suffocated his terminally ill wife in Cyprus after she begged him to. He was released after spending nearly 2 years behind bars, and we're going to be asking if euthanasia really ever is ethically correct. Don't go away.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live with me, Darren Grimes. Now, my next guest is Dr. Trevor Stammers, who's a university lecturer in medical ethics and a former GP for over 30 years. Dr. Stammers joins me now to discuss the ethics of euthanasia. Dr. Stammers, I thank you very much for your time. Now, as you know, our Parliament is exploring its options when it comes to end-of-life care right now. I wonder, have you made a submission into the inquiry? Have we got Dr. Stammers? We can't hear Dr. Stammers. We're going to try and get Dr. Stammers back. Andrew, if I can turn to you whilst we try and sort out those tech issues with Dr. Stammers, pesky little things that they are. Would you ever, if Parliament to say, look, we're going to go full steam ahead, we're going to copy Canada, it's all going to be fine, would you be worried about the fact that the Canadian Supreme Court once said, actually, we were totally fine with all of this, and now, you know, things have gone slightly awry?
I think what I love about this show as well is the stuff we discussed in the break. When you and I are actually on the same ground on this, we talk about playing devil's advocate. There are extreme situations in all of it. You need to make sure there are safeguards so that the craziness where somebody has a bad day and they feel like, I just can't cope today, euthanasia is an option, that would be wrong. You need to make sure, or the other thing where somebody's got some relatives who just can't afford healthcare anymore, and they encourage an elderly relative to say, actually, there's an easy way out and you'll be doing a favour for all of us. Both of those situations are wrong. There's a middle ground with real people involved, and we talked about real people, and no doubt you've got the doctor back.
Absolutely. Dr. Stammers, I'm going to bring you in now. I think you can hear me. Those tech gremlins are gone. Now, Dr. Stammers, you've heard what we've just said there. Do you agree with those sentiments? Are you concerned about the UK potentially moving in Canada's direction?
Yes, I am very much so. And I think this deeply disturbing case, as Andrew was indicating, resulted in part because I understand that Mr. Hunter and his wife had to sell their villa in order to try and get medical care for her cancer. This wasn't something that had occurred overnight. And the lack of access to proper medical care of all kinds, and particularly palliative care, is a prime reason why I think many people, in theory, think that euthanasia is a good idea. I certainly witnessed several of my own relatives in great pain on hospital wards, and needed to do something about that, and did. So I understand the motivation for it. But I think that once you start training doctors to kill patients, even at their own request, it is very difficult to stop it. And every jurisdiction in the world that has introduced it has started off with a limited law for people with 6 months to live, what have you. And it's always expanded then to those with chronic disability, because once you accept the fact that if people are suffering, doctors are allowed to kill them for that suffering, how can you say that, say, the suffering of somebody with severe depression is not permitted and not akin to the pain of an advanced cancer?
Absolutely, and that's what's taking place with our Canadian cousins. That's the debate that's going on there right now. But many of my viewers may be of the view, some of them at least, that actually, if were their partner in a state of pain like that and suffering, frankly, and actually, as you've just suggested, the NHS, it isn't exactly at its best, as we all know right now. Do you ever think there's an argument for someone to be able to ease their suffering, they might perhaps put it like that, and that actually the criminalisation of someone seeking to do good for their partner is quite a cruel thing to bring about in the first place.
Well, if there's any medical system that leaves a woman like Mrs. Hunter in such an advanced state of her cancer without pain control that drove her husband to, I understand from some press reports, to strangle her with, his bare hands, that is a tragedy, and that ought not to have allowed to be happen. And I don't know how the situation escalated to that point. But I think to say that for those, and obviously that is an extreme case and an unusual case, to let that then open the doors to allow doctors to kill, as I say, jurisdictions that have done it then can't limit it. And I'm particularly concerned about what's happened in Canada. Last year, there were 10,000 deaths in Canada. And in Vancouver Island, it was 7% of the deaths. So nearly 1 in 14 was due to euthanasia. And next year, they're extending it to patients with psychiatric illness alone. And when somebody is extremely depressed, and it's suggested to them that they, might have euthanasia as a solution to their problem, that is a very, very serious matter.
Oh, it's extraordinary. It absolutely is extraordinary. And I do think, given what we've just said about the NHS being on its knees at the moment and, no love nor money being thrown at it doesn't appear to be making a difference, I actually worry that we'd be told perhaps killing yourself, essentially, is going to be beneficial to protect the NHS. And that's what I really, really worry about. Is that hyperbole? Is that rhetoric you don't recognise? Where are you at on that?
It's an irony, isn't it? And I think most people who request euthanasia or assisted dying are fearful of what may happen to them when they die. And it's for that reason, I think, that it's the worst possible time when the NHS is already under pressure to introduce the legalization of assisted dying. I mean, it's a well-known maxim that, doctors say sometimes that the cheapest patient is the patient who is dead. And I can't see introducing assisted suicide or euthanasia legislation as a way of getting more money into the NHS. Just as in Canada, there are papers that I could point you to where the economists have done calculations to show how much Canada is saving by these thousands of deaths.
Yeah, Dr. Sammer, stay just there, because I'm gonna turn now to Andrew Eborn, who I think is perhaps Dr. Sammers and I are as one on this issue. Now, do you have any sympathy whatsoever for the merit of the argument against, but actually campaigners like Assistance in Dying and all the rest of it? Really powerful stories. I don't doubt that for a second.
Phenomenally powerful. And the fundamental medical ethics is do no harm. So I get it, and the conflict with doctors and so on and so forth. What the good doctor said is about the slippery slope. So the question is, where on the slope do we do it? If you've got an extreme example where somebody is desperate and they've gone through all the safeguards and so on and so forth, are there ever cases where that might be appropriate to say, OK, we understand it is so extreme and you've gone through all the appropriate safeguards that we spoke about, so it's not the slippery slope for all of it, but it is those extreme situations. And it's also the example I gave earlier about when you withdraw care because somebody says, OK, do not resuscitate or whatever, trying to work out that fine line between that very delicate situation and also assisted dying.
Yeah, absolutely. Have we still got Dr. Stammers there? Yeah, can we put that question to him where he would ever actually see a case like Andrew perhaps does, where actually this would be justifiable?
I think one of the problems is that sometimes in care, in terminal illness, and my own father died of prostate cancer fairly recently, it was very, very difficult to... He expressed a wish that he was not given any further treatment. And even with me as a doctor, as his advocate, I could not stop him being put on a drip of antibiotics for a urine infection a week before he died. And it's that kind of meddlesome medicine of doctors not listening to patients' pleas and their relatives' pleas, that they do not want any more intervention, that I think makes deaths more painful. And we need to get, I think, patients understanding much more of their rights about what they can and cannot have, and then we may have fewer of these desperate cases where people are driven to do the kind of thing David Hunt.
Absolutely. Dr. Trevor Stammers there and Andrew Eborn before him, thank you very much for your time. Now, finally, folks, after the break, we're going to be chatting to psychic medium James Griffiths about the most haunted places in the country. Spooky stuff. Don't go away.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. I'm still Darren Grimes and you're still wonderful. Thank you for your company. Now, my next guest was supposed to be the psychic medium James Griffiths, but unfortunately there's been some spooky goings-on with our connection there. So I'm going to turn to Andrew Eborn, who actually knows a thing or two about the Most Haunted Crew. Remember that show?
I love it,
that
absolutely.
Was a spooky one,
what I also love is the psychic, due to unforeseen circumstances, is not here.
Exactly.
And perfect, wonderful stuff.
It's brilliant.
Friend of mine, Richard Jones, used to be the historian on Most Haunted with Derek Acora. And basically what he did, he would find out little hooks, if you like, for these places that they visited. And one of them was Chillingham Castle, which was owned by, you know, Chillingham Castle is owned by Dominic Cummings' father-in-law.
Very
so
true.
Glorious stuff. And apparently that's one of the most haunted places in the country. And there's also great tales about Henry VIII wandering the corridors of power in, I think, Blenheim Palace or whatever it is. And they realised they got CCTV footage of Henry VIII, but he couldn't get through the fire door, apparently. And we always thought, well, hang on, that's a bit strange. He's supposed to just walk through it, isn't he? So all of those sort of stuff is very interesting. I think from an Ofcom point of view, they always say that you cannot treat it as a real investigation when you're looking at these psychic things. You have to say it's for entertainment purposes only. And I think making sure there's the hook for that sort of historical place makes a lot of sense.
But there used to be a real clamour for this stuff, didn't there? Because most Haunted was really popular.
Oh, people love it.
Yeah, absolutely. But do you think that's sort of gone away a little bit?
Oh, no,
do you
people
think it's
want
just
to
the internet
believe.
taking over and social media is awash with these sort of things?
People want to believe in ghosts. I mean, it's a wonderful tourist attraction to say, hang on, this place is really haunted. It's rather like going to see Nessie. You know, if you drained Loch Ness and proved there was nothing there, what would happen to tourism then? So I think people want to believe on that sort of basis. So let's keep an open mind.
Because, I mean, I was of the view that the only thing that's haunting Newcastle would be Mike Ashley and the spectre of him and his takeover of Newcastle United. But
Hey.
I'm happy to be proven wrong, though.
Well, everything's possible. You work on that sort of premise, which is always a thrill.
Now, I mean, I've never, ever seen a ghost.
Yes.
Have you?
To be honest, I haven't. And another friend of mine, Nick Pope, talks about UFOs. I mean, those are in the news as well.
They are.
And all it is unidentified flying object. Doesn't mean that we've seen an alien, but we can keep an open mind on that sort of basis.
An open mind, though, but come on. You must think a lot of this is a bit pie in the sky, tin
Well, something in the sky.
Something in the sky, yes.
But also, I think it would be arrogant for us to turn around when we're living one tiny planet in amongst a galaxy of a zillion stars. To turn around and say there's not life on any of them, I think would be wrong. I like the idea. Let's keep an open mind. So far, I haven't seen an alien. So far, I haven't seen a ghost. But if I see one tomorrow, I'll come back on and tell you.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't mind knowing a few psychics and mediums, so I'll have to get James's contact details when he's next in Newcastle, because I'd quite like the lottery numbers. I'll tell you that much for free. Now, Andrew Eborn, thank you very much for filling in there. Now, we were supposed to be talking about ghosts, of course, at the Theatre Royal. That would have been fascinating, wouldn't it? Now, folks, thank you very much for your company. It's been an absolutely cracking show, if I do say so myself. Andrew Eborn has made the magic. Now, thank you very much to all of my other guests, of course, this evening. Coming up next, it's Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with the wonderful Emma Webb. You won't want to miss that.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So it's been quite a wet, windy and unsettled day across the UK, and that's been due to Storm Anthony. That's going to move away to the southeast though as we go through this evening to allow for some lighter winds to move in from the west. But we could still see a bit more in the way of cloud, rain and some thunderstorms clinging into the southeast for a while. Also some blustery conditions here. Elsewhere, things drying up, though we could still see some showers for western coasts. And there will be some clear spells around, so in rural areas, temperatures might just drop into the single figures. This will mean it'll be a generally brighter, drier and calmer start to the second half of the weekend, though still some blustery conditions, cloud and rain across East Anglia at first. Cloud and showers soon bubbling up elsewhere, and they could be heavy across Scotland, Northern England, and a chance of a thunderstorm for Northern Ireland. But generally feeling much more pleasant with those temperatures just creeping into the low 20s in the south. After another chilly night, though, on Sunday, it will be a bright start to the new week with plenty of sunshine around. Some showers soon starting to bubble up, but these will be less frequent and lighter in nature than what we're expecting for Sunday. But as we look towards midweek, it does look like things will settle down and become a bit drier, with those temperatures on the rise too.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the...
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.